we're going to now go to talking about intelligent production, specifically about supply chain 4.0. And the presenter is Shaker. Shaker
Guys,
Tatarajan is the Chief Supply Chain and Inventory Officer for American Eagle Outfitters. Shaker has held a leadership role in major corporations such as Walmart, Target, Walt Disney Company, Anheuser-Busch, Pepsi, and Coca-Cola. He led operations for these corporations as was instrumental in creating digital supply chain capabilities. He's credited with creating game-changing capabilities like scalable grocery home shopping models, Magic Band, CoolLift, DSD Innovation, digital supply chains, industry's first control tower. Shaker is responsible for bringing emerging science to companies and has led teams that have generated over 1,800 filed patents. He personally is just informed the updated number today. He also personally has filed 400 patents and has 120 of those have been issued. Very impressive. Over to you, Shaker.
good morning, everyone, and for people in different parts of the world, like wherever you are, really excited to talk to you all. I want to actually give you guys a little bit of uh, my personal background and kind of walk through um, where I think like supply chain is generally headed. And before I kind of start talking about the topic itself, I just wanted to give you a little bit of context of like my background and how the convergence of all the things have kind of come and why the supply chain 4.0. Again, as James mentioned, I had the good fortune and probably by God's grace, um, was part of a lot of big companies, and they were all going through, you know, challenging times. If you think about, beverage as a company and in an industry in 2000, people were getting very conscious with um, diet and obesity and basically serving food, beverages and other things, carbonated beverages particularly. And they were going through a lot of innovation in their supply chain, and so we had to rethink like how logistics was organized and supply chain was conducted. And that led to a lot of like planning innovation, that led to a lot of like supply chain logistics innovation, which actually enabled the brands to continue to prosper. And then I was very fortunate to work for other big companies, particularly Walt Disney. I enjoyed the most. We actually came up with the whole concept of Magic Band, which was building trust and transparency and also safety for children in theme parks, and also making it a friction-free experience. And probably that was the first foray of basically like converging technology to data science to like customer experience. Very interesting kind of a journey there. And then with the big boxes, right, like Walmart and Target, very very interesting challenges. Grocery, as you all know, is one of those stable businesses that people tend to consume all the time. But like the supply chain that Walmart had, despite like Walmart being such a big retailer, they actually have 189 distribution centers, about like 55,000, tractor trailers out there hauling the product, and driving around billions and billions of miles, pretty much on a daily basis, with a store fleet of 5,400 stores. And most of the customers are within like 7 miles of a Walmart, 93% of them. So, and we could not scale that model, the grocery model, from a delivery standpoint. So we had to basically figure out like how to enable that. Like even given a company like Walmart couldn't actually figure like the logistical way to kind of unlock profitably something like that. And then the same challenge with Target. So we were able to kind of transform that. So that actually led me to think like, hey, like all these big companies have a lot of leverage, have a lot of scale. Sometimes they struggle. What does it feel like to be in a mid-tier company, right? In the midst of a tsunami of commerce, where to Gary's point, people are pampered by gratification, instant gratification, and that led me squarely into American Eagle. And what I'm going to share with you all at this time um, is the remarkable kind of aha moment for me as a supply chain professional, because there is a world beyond big companies. There is a lot of small and mid-tier companies, and like how should the supply chain be organized was the question which was on my mind always. And so that led to this kind of this supply chain 4.0, right? And I wanted to take some time to walk you through that. It's kind of an infographic. Like I'll be very meticulous about kind of walking through and giving you the context. And then, because all of the things that we are hearing right now, be it AI, be it basically like autonomous, be it basically predictive science, real-time decisioning, digital supply chains, they're all means to the end to something which is getting formed, which I call supply chain 4.0, right? And that probably like will take different forms and fashion, whether you're a big box or a big company and a small or a mid-sized company, and how do you organize yourself to what's coming next. And that is what I would love to share with you all today, to kind of give you guys like my lens on where things are headed. And it's just an individual perspective, but I see this like happening in other industries, and I'm kind of taking that anomaly and applying it to basically supply chain, which has been largely unorganized, efficient but unorganized, and basically there's a lot of room for improvement. So with that said, basically let me walk you through this concept of the supply chain 4.0. So if you guys step back and basically I'm gonna date you back a little bit, and I'm gonna walk you through the concept here. And I'm not a PowerPoint guy. Like I love to think about like things in images and kind of talk about things, because that's how my mind works. So basically apologize that if you're expecting a very formalized presentation from me, you're getting a infographic with like a lot of things to kind of like think through. So if you go back, so what I feel is like for every economic shift, the supply chain kind of was born to service that economy, right? And that's been largely the premise of how supply chains have kind of evolved. So if you go back, basically, like the days of Ford and others, all of the economy was primarily kind of do-it-yourself kind of a thing, right? So basically,
Shaker, do you mind actually increasing the width of the graphic a little bit? You can actually increase the whole screen, so we can actually see your whole desktop.
Yeah. Can you see that now?
I think it's actually smaller that way.
Yeah, I know. So that's why I had
Yep.
Okay, got it. I'm gonna. Can you see it better now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. So all of the world, like in the early stages, the economy 1.0, what I call the economy 1.0, was kind of like a one size fits all model. Think about basically either like GM of the world, they made their cars, they had their distribution, they had their parts. So it is a vertically integrated supply chain, or kind of do it yourself kind of a model. That's where we largely existed, in the early 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And supply chain was not even a word then, right? Basically people managed material movement, that's it. And they produced, so there was some production science associated with it. And that's where the world largely existed. And we had a lot of small mom and pop, people that were actually servicing. So there was not like a notion of optimization. There was not a notion of basically like efficiencies. There were like, there were like work standards and work principles, which kind of largely guided all of your processes in the supply chain. Then there was a major economic shift. And this is when basically the globalization of supply chain started happening, right? And this is when basically like countries started thinking about trade efficiencies, right? So it was like what ended up happening is like as macroeconomics started like kind of unveiling itself, like every country started finding its own niche of where they can actually accelerate and where they can actually provide services. And in some places, basically, America became like more of an innovation and services kind of a setup, and like Asia became more of your manufacturing hub, so to say. So there was trade efficiencies, and basically people were exchanging those trade economies that were getting like translated into a new supply chain which was getting formed. And all of the supply chain principles that you heard all the way from 1980s all the way through like like into early 2010s, even like 2000, probably like 12 and 13, was all about how do I intelligently source product. Okay, so much so that we made the supply chain so much leaner that it was like not resilient. Like, and COVID actually kind of unveiled all of those scars for a lot of people. And basically it was also very slow moving, because like in this world, products were produced in one place. It was all about asset and labor efficiencies. It was all about sourcing efficiencies. It was about cost, and basically it was about the trade efficiencies, right? And supply chains were there to solve that sourcing problem and the planning problem, right? Am I making sense to all of you? So that's where like all of the genesis of the supply chain for the early 2000s and like late 1990s actually started playing in. Like, and that's why you had a whole host of systems. Once you got the procurement problem fixed, then you started thinking about, okay, how do I manage my demand and my supply, right? What is the ratio between inventory and my sales? And how do I manage that ratio of inventory to sales in a very, very intelligent form and fashion? And that's where there was a rise of like all of these ERP systems and planning systems, so to say, like JDAs, the Infos, the Manigistics of the world, the SAPs, the Oracles, and like we know all those names. They're all like non-fungible data models, which actually largely made you focus your operations to the data models they actually kind of service to you, right? So it was not basically a very flexible system, but it solved a generic problem. The generic problem was, how do I make sure that the products that I'm actually making are getting there like with the expectation of the inventory coverage, right? And we are largely even operating today in that model. If you look at like a lot of these industries, be it construction and other places, like it's still like in that very realm of sourcing from a different place, managing the supply chain efficiencies, and we are lighting up the supply chain, right? We are basically bringing like visibility to the dark spots in the supply chain and enhancing the planning and efficiencies associated with the supply chain, right? But I see a different trend when I started working for like basically the big boxes. And that I think is basically what I call the economy 3.0, right? In the economy 3.0, what started happening is basically we started getting into more of a unit economic model, right? So the distinct difference between, from a commerce standpoint, I'm just like coming at it from commerce, and you can extrapolate it to other industries too. What started happening was, in retail particularly, you went to the stores, you bought the product, and basically you brought it home. So it was kind of basically a self-service model, right? If you want to buy things, you do your own shit kind of model. So, but as you kind of move into this unit economy model, with particularly with Amazon and others, it became basically a full service model, right? The full service model is, I have to service the customer anywhere they want and anyhow they want. and I have to have all of the logistics capabilities to be able to manage to the problem, right? And Amazon, you like it or not, has been a behemoth trying to build the supply chain infrastructure which services the commerce platform, so to say, and really has mastered this unit economy problem. Unit economy is like I go and like basically, order a pencil and like, they figure out a way to get it to you and get it to you in the very fastest way and the cheapest cost, and they're coming closer and closer to where you live. So the transportation cost continues to kind of like come down because of the economies of scale, right? At the same time, when basically Amazon was kind of like pampering like the customers with a new mindset, we also have seen like the rise of the Airbnbs, the Ubers of the world, where basically there was a lot of sharing economy going on, to Greg's point, right? Like Greg was actually dead on, like, those are the new norms of for something to stay here. And sharing economy became a very big like concept, so to say. And like, and I was telling you the story of Walmart. Like even with Walmart, basically we could not get like our own grocery trucks to deliver to the customers in a profitable way. It cost us about $38 to make a delivery on a $110 basket, which is a losing proposition primarily. So we had to basically partner with someone like a Uber and our own associates, and basically like customers who are walking into the front door to make them a delivery agent. So it largely became a crowdsourced model, even for a company as big as Walmart is, right? So that was the rise of a different economic structure where people demanded flexibility, consumers demanded flexibility, associates demanded flexibility, and basically like the existing paradigms of self-service model was completely disrupted, right? It was all like full service model, on demand, as I need that, right? So if you're, if you're like Amazon and if you're like Walmart, you may be like, you may be having the last laugh, because in a digital economy, the winner takes it all pretty much. That's what we've seen like time and again. Uber, takes it all. Netflix takes it all, right? So Google takes it all. So we've seen that happen over and over. And so for all the other companies like which are in this, which are trying to figure out like how to actually compete in the future, you should actually take what happened in the economy 3.0 and the supply chains which were created around that, which was around flexibility, around like inventory distribution and distributed logistics models, and basically figuring out how the transportation and logistics environment needs to like cater to the demand of one, right? And apply that to the enterprise scale. And that's basically where that's where the world is headed right now. That's what I call basically the economy 4.0. So all of this was going on from a business to consumer standpoint. What's going to happen next is whatever happened to the business to consumer interactions, which was highly digitized, highly flexible, asset sharing model, and trying to figure out how to best meet the consumer needs, now gets basically kind of thrown onto the business to business transactions, right? So this is where supply chain kind of needs to kind of like stay ahead of the game. Otherwise, you're going to be caught napping on this one. So, what do you expect in like in basically a economy 4.0? Well, so this is where like I have a set of principles which actually guide that. Like, I don't define supply chain 4.0 as one thing or two things, so to say. It's basically a collection of principles, and once you have mastered those principles, you know that you're in a supply chain 4.0 kind of realm, pretty much. And I'm talking about my own experience, guys. Basically, like in Walmart, we used to move around like 500,000 containers, ocean containers. In a company like American Eagle or any other mid retailer, you're moving about like 5,000 containers. You don't have simply any leverage, right? So that's largely the big section of the world, and that section of the world should exist to maintain the genetic diversity of what consumers can actually buy and choose from. And that's where all of this principles become very, very important, and how do you tie them together? Like, AI is one of those, digitization is one of those, but like, there are some fundamental principles of how you want to think about a supply chain 4.0. And that's what I want you to walk away with today. Okay, so here are the principles for the supply chain 4.0. It has to be on demand, right? That is like one of the core principles of any supply chain. So today we build a supply chain and an infrastructure which is highly, it's not flexible, it's not like variable, right? It primarily is like a very monolithical system. Like, suppose COVID happens and suppose you have to shut down one of your production centers, you're pretty much done, right? Like, if you have like a handful of production centers which are running your facilities, keeping those operations safe has become like a very challenging aspect. So how do you pop up an operation, be it COVID or not, for the surge capabilities that you need? And how do you maintain the variable cost structure in the supply chain? You have to think about all supply chains as being variable and being like less fixed in the future. And the only way you can achieve a very variable supply chain is by having things be on demand. So what do you need for that? Well, you need to have an enterprise software or like some kind of an operating system, which is pretty much a plug and play. Everyone in the virtual network, be it Ryder, be it like Geodis, or be it like anyone who can provide warehousing services, they're all pre-plumbed, good to go. And when you need them, you turn them on. When you don't need them, you turn them off. Okay, so it has to be, so assets have to be largely just like you order Uber, and like you basically like you get an Uber when you want it, and you basically like when you don't want it, you don't need to actually like summon for one. So the network as a whole not only needs to be morphable, but it needs to have an operating system which has like all of these layers plugged in, which basically helps you enable that. And you may be thinking like, is this guy just talking philosophy, or is this something which is going on like this? And I'm sure there is, and we are actually building this. Like, we have our AEO company, the owner of the AEO company also owns many other brands. And we are in essence actually building this kind of a network to be able to make it all fungible. And that's what you've been reading in the news so far about our distributed logistics model. The second one is basically it's highly customer centric. You only win if basically customers are satisfied with you, right? So in this world where loyalty means like nothing, in this world, basically like convenience means everything, flexibility means everything. And people are like generally browsing not for a specific product, for a company. They're actually like, they're just looking for, I want a widget. Like, who cares basically if it comes from a Walmart or an Amazon or basically from a Target or anywhere else. They're like looking for widgets. And I think that the dilution of the brand basically makes it very difficult to kind of like be like less personal to customers. So basically, like everything about the future of the supply chain or the 4.0 supply chain is built around the premise that you have to be catering to the demand of one. And you don't do it like by throwing money at it. You just like do like that by creating frenemy networks. Take all the enemies of a common enemy and then make them your friends. So by doing that, how do you actually unleash like very consumer centric kind of like a thinking on that? It has to be scalable for sure. It cannot be like it has to be built on the premise of third parties and gig economy. I don't think there are going to be supply chains which are going to be fully owned by one service provider. It has to be like, Ryder has a play in this, Google has a play in this. It has like everyone who's either providing technology services and like service and labor, they all have a play into the mix. And basically that's how you're going to get to a very holistic way of managing capacity. Because everyone is capacity constrained in their own limitation. But when you basically expand your thinking, like just like what Uber did, like, hey, like 96% of the car is actually sitting on waiting and not even like running around. So why do we need more cars? So I think like when you kind of open your mind to basically the availability of capacity as a whole, as a system, then you begin to unlock a lot of interesting things. And that was basically one of the things that we did, like, the Walmart and the Uber deal, and the Walmart and the crowdsource deals that we did. It has to be built on, like, what I call asset smart principles. Asset smart is primarily, like, how do you, like, build transparency? This is what, like, Greg was talking about. How do you basically manage transparency of service delivery and manage risk of bad actors? Whenever you're introducing a gig economy artist, or whenever you're basically going into a very variable supply chain, the reliability of the services are the most important thing that actually suffers, right? And when you're building a platform to manage this, that's the most important thing everyone forgets, right? When Uber was built, they never, like, thought that basically there's going to be a bad actor, very bad, that they didn't figure it out, but, like, there are bad actors, right? So one of the core premise of how you build a platform is basically think about, like, information validation, and also basically, like, making sure that there is, like, trust and transparency built into the network. And that's a very core principles of service delivery and transparency that you're going to have. It has to be open and shared. It has to be multi-partner, and it has to be digitized, for sure. Like, it is, like, primarily associated with, many participants, and basically there's a digital twin to everything physical out there. And finally, like, you primarily think about, like, safety and reliance in the supply chain. So this was one of the things. COVID actually was a rude awakening for a lot of people in many different ways, and for us too, right? Like, basically we ours is a $7 billion retail outfit, and we had, like, 3 distribution centers, and a couple of them were actually at the risk of closing. So the business was on brink of actually, like, getting through, like, very tough times. And then you realize basically the safety and the redundancy of the supply chain, and how we need to actually start thinking about it. So that in a nutshell is basically all of the supply chain principles. But I don't want you to think that, like, the supply chain principles are like a vacuum, right? Like, there are some examples of all of these things which were built out there.
Shekhar,
yes.
it's a very interesting and a profound topic, but because of the time limitations, I think we're going to actually have to cut you short, and then maybe actually answer some of these, talk about some of these actually as part of the panel discussion.
For sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much.